The University of California, Riverside presents Blue, Gold, and Black, the podcast that's dedicated to amplifying Black voices at UCR. I'm Dominique Beale from UCR's Community Engagement and Outreach Unit. In each episode, we'll be talking to UCR students, campus leaders, and community partners to explore the intersection of being Black and being a Highlander at UCR. And I can't wait for you to meet today's guest. Let's get started. What's up, everybody? I want to give a huge shout out to Toy, who is the Assistant Director of the LGBT Resource Center. The LGBT Resource Center sponsored today's episode, so make sure you guys check them out, show them some love. Please bear with us for a few minutes at the start of today's episode. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but after a few minutes, the video will kick back in and you'll be able to get better acquainted with our guests. Stick with us. Welcome, everybody, to the Blue, Gold, and Black podcast, where we are amplifying Black voices at UCR. I am your host, Dominique Beale. Today, we have a super special guest. Gabriel Maldonado is a former UCR student, graduated from UCR, and he's been doing some really, really amazing things ever since he's graduated. So we're going to talk to him today, get a little bit about his background, his story, his experience at UCR, and what he's been doing since graduation. Gabriel, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing pretty good, Dominique. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you. So, let's go ahead and get started. So, Gabriel, if you could, please give us a little bit of your background history, kind of how you grew up, where you grew up, and also, if you can, highlight what it was for you growing up and identifying with your Black experience, right? How did you kind of come into that identity? What were some of the pivotal moments throughout your upbringing that kind of reinforced your Black identity? And let's start there and let's have a great conversation.
Yeah. Wow. Well, firstly, thank you so much for allowing me to be in the space. And
Yes,
I'm
sir.
really excited to just, share a little bit about what my experience has been. And hopefully that can inspire and, give a little bit of guidance to the next generation of UCR students and alum.
Yes, sir.
So I am the founder and CEO of TruEvolution. We are a community-based nonprofit organization. We're a community health center. We're an LGBT-focused organization, and we are an infectious disease organization focusing largely on HIV and STDs in Riverside and San Bernardino County. And, it's really interesting to think that today I work, at this intersection of health equity and racial justice. And I've always believed that in order to kind of get the whispers of where you may be going or what your purpose is in life or what your calling is, you can look at your past. And there's so much evidence in your history and in your adolescence and your culture and your identity and your upbringing that really informs you of like who it is that you can become and what it is that you can do in the world. And, I know for me that even though Riverside and San Bernardino is where I pledge allegiance, I grew up in Compton. I'm from Los Angeles County, and I grew up in a time that was very interesting, particularly for race relations, and really challenging place for someone who comes from the biracial experience. I am Black and African American from my mother, and I am Latino, Mexican American on my father's side, and that's really important because the time that I grew up, in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a very changing demographic in the South Los Angeles area where neighborhoods that have historically been Black and African American all of a sudden had this new influx of Latinos and Mexican Americans and people from El Salvador and people from Guatemala and folks from different parts of Latin America. And this kind of mixing within our neighborhoods created a lot of tension in which, being biracial wasn't just, a manifestation of your identity, but it really could be the difference in survival.
Wow.
Because for, young boys and young girls, young people growing up in places like Compton and like Watts, your tribe is what results in your ability to succeed and be safe and be protected. And so, it was very challenging for me to kind of understand my own identity. My mom is Black, and for anyone who has a Black mother, you know that, having a Black mother makes you 100% Black most often, because
Period.
the culture and, the foods that are cooked and, the nuances and the way they discipline is very unique to a Black experience. And so, that has always been something that I've carried within my heart. And I think as I've grown and as I've gotten closer to my father over the years and gotten closer to the Latino experience, I really feel as though that the Afro-Latino identity is something that I hold really quite dear, and that shows clearly in my organization's work today, because we're about 40% in our client census of African Americans, and we're about 60% in our client census on Latinos. And I think the Latinx community and the Black community are people that we center in our work, and I grew up in poverty, and I specifically watched how the industrialization of urban communities, specifically in Compton, be overtaken by refineries and chemical factories and distribution warehouses and logistics companies. And, I really watched how, poor communities of color in urban environments were being taken advantage of. And, today, that has really inspired and informed my passion and commitment to public health and my focus on health disparities. I think that, being a gay man has certainly been a very challenging, traumatic, blessing, powerful experience. And, the time that I was in high school was not very forgiving on LGBTQ youth. And I think it was those feelings of being, marginalized and bullied and not understanding my own self. I think that is really what kind of centers and anchors the work that I do today, to center around the human dignity of LGBTQ people. So that's just a little bit about where I'm from and kind of how that informs a bit of the work that I do today.
Yeah, and I know in the earlier conversation we had, you had a little bit of something to say about the term intersections and intersectionality and stuff. And I thought it was really interesting the way you phrased it. And I'd like for you to talk on that, because when we talk about identities, right, you're Black African American, you're Mexican American, you are a gay man. And so obviously all of these things culminate into one human experience, right? But it can be a little bit difficult navigating and finding the language to fully express that or articulate that, especially when it's mixed with maybe traumatic experiences or a lack of support for who you are becoming. Can you kind of share your thoughts on that with the audience? Because I thought that was really fascinating the way you put it.
Yeah. Well, growing up, there were very, very few representations, and there were very few examples, of what it meant to be a gay man in my time, period, in general. Right. There were very jaded, stereotyped, and incomplete explanations and articulations of what it meant to be a Black man. And so when I came to UCR and when I went to college, it was really one of the first times that I was equipped with language and vocabulary to articulate who I am. And so, I remember when I was in undergrad, that was when the term intersectionality really started to become a very, widely used phrase or colloquial to describe these kinds of layers and these, kind of juxtaposing or adjacent cultural experiences with the person's identity or lived experience. And when I got into doing activism, there is nothing more sobering in working with the least among us to realize that the college experience was indeed a great privilege. And that everyday community and people that don't come from the ivory towers or were not equipped with some kind of academic, intellectual way of articulating themselves still operate on a combination of a very simplistic understanding of themselves, but also recognizing that there does not need to be these kinds of well-articulated and well-defined distinctions in how my identity shows up. So, for instance, I am a Black man, and I am also a gay man, but I also am a Christian, and I am a believer in the Judeo-Christian framework and vocabulary of spirituality. I am a spiritual person, but I have found that Christianity and specific passages and specific stories in the Bible is what allowed me to find my liberation and freedom. And that isn't the case with everyone. And I think that is one of those examples where if I were to look at my identities as differing identities somehow intersecting, then I'm going to run into a whole series of disagreements between what does it mean to be a liberated gay man versus what does it mean to be a person of spiritual practice, someone to specifically come from the Christian experience and the Christian vocabulary. And I think for me, it got too jarring for me to look at my identities in differing lanes and then trying to figure out how they all intersect. And rather, I simply show up into the space in the full layers of complication that I may come. And sometimes the way I may communicate myself may represent one culture or one way of thinking more than the other.
Sure.
I may not always come with the most, anarchist, liberation, tear the system down type framework. And that doesn't make me any less Black, any less brown, any less radical, any less woke. It just means that I come from a very layered set of experiences and wisdoms and understandings and practices. And how they all come together is messy. Yeah. And it's not always balanced, and it's not always an even 50-50% percentage. It just depends on, what is happening in my environment and what kind of power in that moment I'm being called to summon. And I pull and I draw from religion to identity to race to culture to everything to be able to kind of make decisions and move myself forward in life. And so I really just encourage us to not only be empowered by the more sophisticated language that we may have in our identity, but at some point in the course of your identity's experience, to be able to liberate yourself from all vocabulary. And that you don't have to confine yourself by any form of words, and you may not even have the ability to express who it is you are, what it is you're feeling, and that's okay. That's okay too. And so I always encourage that as people are trying to figure out who it is they are in the world.
Welcome back. We had a small little edit. Welcome back to the Blue, Gold, and Black podcast. We got everything sorted out. Gabriel's still with us. He's still here. We just wrapped up a little bit talking about how identities clash when you come from various backgrounds or different orientations or genders. And pretty much, I think what Gabriel was trying to get at was just saying that at some point in time, you're going to have to be okay or find the space to be okay with all of your identities coming together. And in certain situations, one identity might come out more than the other, but you are a culmination of all of these things. They don't have to be segmented and compartmentalized in order to fully understand. You are having a human experience, and this is just how it's expressed. And we don't always need to have sophisticated language and vocabulary to state that we are who we are. And I think that can resonate with a lot of our students. In particular, I grew up mixed as well. I had a Black father and a white mother. And so that was and for me, it was nothing I ever really thought about too in depth, maybe once I started getting a little bit older. But my father, we grew up very Black. He was 100% adamant that it doesn't matter what type of hair, curly hair you got. If you're light skinned, you're Black, you're going to work twice as hard. And that's how the world is going to see you. And so a lot of those type of Black euphemisms and expressions were instilled in me at a very young age. And so that's always something I clung to. And as ironic as it is, I never really felt like it clashed per se, with my whiteness so much. And so I would also say I'm very fortunate in that, because I know other people can have very much more difficult experiences kind of navigating that way through their identity. So thank you for sharing that. And so what I want to do now is I kind of want to ask you, so is college something you knew you always wanted to do? Was college always instilled in you? Like, you're going to go to college, you're going to get them grades, you're going to get a good job? Or how did you kind of find your way into higher education?
God, no. That's one of those moments, right, where I knew God was real.
Yeah.
No, I had the challenging but very blessed experience to really not have any of the traditional kind of character traits as an adolescent that lets you know that you're valuable. I did not do well in school. How I grew up and the environment that I grew up in, and kind of the conditions and environmental home that I was raised in, it really just wasn't conducive for robust learning or for healthy learning, or and so I didn't do well in school, and I was gonna get held back for like failing math like almost 3 years in a row, from like 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade. And I did not have any kind of notable athletic talents. Not very creative, couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler if I tried.
Right.
There were just so many things around me that typically are given as opportunities to young people to let them know that they have purpose, they have direction, they have a calling. You're good at this, do this, focus on this, put your energy into this. And often, particularly for young people of color and young people who grow up in certain low-income communities and disadvantaged communities, typically it is things like your athletic ability, or you could become that Bill and Melinda Gates Millennium Scholarship winner, or you were considered the best and the brightest in your class. And I didn't have any of those things. And I really was told that I was supposed to just go to the military, and that's kind of what I was told to do by a lot of people. And I think leadership and the kind of leadership opportunities that I got towards the latter part of my high school career, it sort of opened up this whole other world to me of things that you could do. And, and I found my salvation was my work ethic. Because even though I wasn't the fastest, though I was certainly not the smartest, I wasn't nearly the most creative, I would work the hardest. And I was the first one to get up. And I would be the last one to go to bed. And it has been my work ethic that has allowed me the opportunity to go to a 4-year university. And unfortunately, because of the, just the unfortunate state of our education system in the United States, now you need a whole lot more than work ethic to get through any kind of a college experience. And you could have all the hardest work ethic in the world, and there are still so many significant financial and political and geographic reasons why people are not able to achieve higher education. And so for me, it really was God that just gave me that window. And I actually got into UC Santa Barbara as well. And most of my peers that got into UCs were either going to UCLA or UC Santa Barbara. And so I thought I was going to go to UC Santa Barbara because that's where I knew everyone from my high school was going that did get into a UC, that didn't go to UCLA. And something in my instinct, and I remember when I went out there, my family is from Riverside, and I was like, I don't want to go out there because my family's out there. And I think I'm so grateful that I did. I'm so grateful that I did. And UCR was the blessing that I didn't know was en route. Certainly not when I was trying to prepare for college.
And so, one of the major themes that I've been noticing in the interviews that I've been doing, with the Black community here on campus is everybody so far has talked about this aspect of mentorship, right? And just having one or maybe those two key people at that key time in their life that took what could have been a train wreck into, a luxury train line, right? And it was just that pivotal moment that allowed them to kind of really alter their mind, I guess, in a way, to say like, yo, the pursuit of this higher education can really allow me to change my circumstances, right? We talk about things like upward and social mobility, right? And how higher education can play a part in that. So, were there moments before you got to UCR that you could identify a person or a group of people who like really kind of just grabbed you, picked you up, and then set you on the right track? Was there anyone that kind of provided that mentorship to you?
Yes. and I'll just say generally that my entire career and everything that I have achieved in this brief time is all based on relationships. Every bit of it. I owe everything that I have to mentors and peers and supporters and advisors who have shaped everything that I am. And I feel like that's also what makes me indestructible. Because I am not just built on myself, and I'm not just built on what I achieved, but I am built on all of the many mentors and advisors and peers who poured into me. And I think that's one of the things that college and UCR particularly equipped me with, was a network and a series of relationships that have lasted throughout the years. I would say that, before UCR, the now Los Angeles City Councilman Joe Buscaino, prior to him becoming a city council member, he was a cop with the Los Angeles Police Department.
Okay.
And he worked in coordination with a high school-based program called the Police Academy, which was throughout multiple different districts throughout LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, and I was a part of that program. And through that, I met Joe. And Joe has known me since I was 13 years old, and I knew him, before he gave anyone speech in any kind of suit. He was a cop that we all knew as Joe. And when I say that was probably Joe and Sergeant Plows and Commander McNamara, if I remember all of them correctly.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were, funny enough, when I think about the state of the police system and the criminal justice system and all the work that I stand for, I owe so much of the seeds for who I am today to those officers in the Los Angeles Police Department, and I would be doing an injustice to my sense of justice by not calling the names of those who poured into me. And so I think that there are still opportunities and hope for us to be able to identify the threads within the system that can be used to empower Black, brown, poor communities. And I think we need to go about remedying and replicating and enhancing and changing these systems that can give more young people like myself an opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think it's critical, and we're going to transition then into the part of mentorship where you're in a position of leadership now, and now you're able to reach behind you and pull the next generation up. But before that, let's talk about, for prospective students, what was your UCR experience like? It's a big college campus. It's part of the UC system. It's an institution, right? And it has a bunch of positives and negatives. But what was it about UCR that kind of then shifted your trajectory even more to your postgraduate career that you're in? How was your UCR experience?
Well, I do want to say that I graduated in 2011, and I was the class of 2011, but I came into UCR in 2007. And gotcha. I will just tell you, UCR was a very different place than what it is today. In many ways, UCR has just become such a magical place of respect and status. And I always say that every year I see that UCR is making my degree more valuable. So I'm so grateful to all of the faculty and the administrators at UCR, because I remember when I graduated in 2011, the amount of respect that degree carries today from that institution has certainly elevated as the university has grown in position and stature and expanding to the School of Medicine and all of the many things that are coming out of the university. So I want to say that there are many amazing things that have happened. Sure. However, I will say that when I went to UCR, you know, it was a village. It was a village. It wasn't too big.
Right.
It was a good size. Campus culture was strong.
Yeah.
Unity was strong. I'm not in the Greek life, but I was an admiring observer of Greek culture. And
Sure.
Greek culture on UCR's campus, particularly for the Black community, was just so robust. The Divine Nine had events every week. Almost all the Divine Nine had a chapter that was fully active and functional on campus. And, you know, you just saw a whole lot of innovation that came out, and the kinds of relationships that we created inside of our classrooms. I mean, I walked away with some of my best friends I met in my lectures. I mean, my best friends today that are still like my ride or dies today. Yeah, I met in a lecture in one of the large lecture halls of like 200. I don't know if people do that today. Like, I don't know if that happens in the level of common occurrence that it did then. You know, and that kind of collegiality and camaraderie that you felt on the campus. We had our issues. I will say, though, to answer your question directly, my campus experience was very much a bubble from the things that were happening in my personal life. And my personal life, it was the most traumatic set of experiences from about 20 to 25 that they were the catalyst. The absolute catalyst for my life today. And I think if that hadn't been juxtaposed against the camaraderie, the solidarity, the relationships, the people, and the real inspiration that I got, particularly I found my passion for political science and government and political philosophy. I found that at UCR, and I didn't have that before. You know, I didn't have that before. I grew into my passion for the world and culture through my experiences at UCR. And I think that's what allowed me to get through what I was going through in my personal life, was that kind of pouring into the soul that my college experience gave me.
No, that's really dope. And, you know, I think back to my undergrad experience, and I always tell students that I kick myself in the butt for it, but I wasn't immersed into my college experience. I wasn't living on campus. I always had at least 2 jobs. I had a kid my second semester of my junior year. And so I was very jaded towards my undergrad experience, because how you said, you know, your UCR experience was vibrant. It was challenging. It was camaraderie, and it was juxtaposed with your personal life. My personal life completely bled over into my undergrad experience, and it really jaded me, and I was very frustrated because I wasn't doing well in school, and it took me till my 3rd time on academic probation to realize, like, oh, it's my personal life that's, you know, making my college experience so tough. And I, you know, when I got to UCR, at least professionally, last year, I was instantly blown away with Costo Hall, right? Where all of the gender and ethnic resource centers are. And I was just like, I've never seen this before. I didn't even know this type of stuff existed beyond like a school having a Black student union, right? Like we actually have an African student programs. We actually have an LGBTQ resource center, women's center, or Middle Eastern center. Like, I just thought that was so dope. And, you know, I try to tell students now, like, even with the challenges that UCR has, like, you can build and find community. You can get involved in such a way and advocate for yourself in such a way that, you know, you're constantly trying to push the university to be better. And I think, you know, I think there's a lot of people on campus, especially within the Black community, that are really focused on making the, you know, future generations of scholars coming in, making sure that they know that they can feel supported and be safe. And so, obviously, you own your own business, TruEvolution. Is that something that you got started while at UCR, or did that come more so after the fact, or did UCR kind of plant the seeds of what you're doing today?
Well, you know, my vision for having an organization that would focus on social justice
Mm-hmm.
came about a year before I even started at UCR. It came the summer prior to my high school graduation. And as I said, my latter half of my high school career, I immersed myself in leadership and community work. I've been a community organizer since I was about 16 years old. And I think it was this, this idea of that I can make a difference, and that there are other misfits, and there are other people who are the least among us who need a voice, and who need someone to speak on their behalf, and someone who can speak with them, and speak for yourself, being a part of the community. And so when I came to UCR, I think UCR, because it is an institution, and there's formal rigor, and there's formality, and there's academia, and I think that taste of, for the first time, being able to dive in critically into subjects of my choosing, and I could really examine areas and issue focuses that were my passion. It really unlocked for me this whole other universe of being able to take my passion and my previous work in community and to actualize it into something formal that can drive and have power and garner and solicit resources and have political power. And I think one of my first courses at UCR in my freshman year was comparative politics, and it specifically looked at the comparison between communism in China and communism in the USSR. And one of the things that really became apparent to me in just trying to understand how ideas and philosophy and belief systems, and how do they materialize themselves in a way that they can actually have an impact in changing the country around you. And that was being able to collect and maneuver power. And it's one of those words that is often feared by a lot of people, particularly in the very radical spaces, is this notion of power is something that belongs to the system, and it belongs to the white man, it belongs to the oppressive systems, or the white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist system, as Audre Lorde puts it, or Bell Hooks puts it. And I think that when we can really capture power, and we can really figure out how do we mobilize power through the democracy, through institutions, I think then we can, do something to change the world around us. And, really being a political science undergraduate at UCR really helped me to expand my idea of political power, of economic power, of social power. And I think TruEvolution, that has been one of the guiding approaches that we've done to our work, is by building relationships within the system, but also within community. Hopefully we can create a bridge between the people and resources. And that really is something that we live by.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, I also want to ask, because obviously we have the fabulous Miss Toy, the assistant director of the LGBTQ Resource Center. Please make sure you shout out Toy. She's the main person who helped facilitate this interview today with Mr. Maldonado. Can you kind of just talk to us about that experience? What was your experience like being a black man on UCR's campus, but also a gay man, and utilizing the LGBTQ Resource Center in working with Toy? And how did that kind of empower you throughout your journey at UCR as well?
Well, I think there are some similarities between some of the experiences that you shared that you had at UCR and mine. I think for the early part of my experience at UCR, I was working 2 jobs, and I was taking 18 units. So if I wasn't in a classroom, I was at work or I was asleep.
Right.
And I did not utilize or dive into any of the resources at the LGBT Resource Center for at least the first 2, even 3 years. It really wasn't until the end of my 3rd year, 4th year. And I'll be honest with you, I regret it. I really regret that a lot. And it's because the challenges that I was going through in my personal life that I had mentioned, was really around my sexuality and developing it. I didn't know what my sexuality really meant. I didn't know how I was supposed to manifest it. At the time, it was the Proposition 8 campaign, which passed in the state of California. So there were so many, again, power. There were so
Yes.
many political representations that told me that my sexuality was not welcomed in this society.
Wow.
There were so many things, you know, and
Yeah.
especially because when I came to UCR, there was a protest in favor of Proposition 8 right there on the corner of Martin Luther King, of all places, MLK, and Canyon Crest, right there at
Right.
that corner, right across from where the parking lot is. And there were all these signs that people held up that said, God hates faggots. And I think that it was in those early days that I should have stepped into the UCR LGBT Resource Center.
Right.
And I think I could have found a people and a group and a camaraderie with queer folks that would have helped me maneuver through my identity in a much more healthy way. And
Sure.
I was involved in a very, my first relationship was extremely abusive and very violent. And very violent. And I actually still have the restraining order and my doctor's papers in my
Wow.
safe right here to
Wow.
keep as a reminder of the very abusive experience that I
Yeah.
had when I first came into the LGBT
Wow.
community. So I do regret, not being a part of it. What did happen though is that in my last year, Toy arranged for me to go and participate in, I don't think it exists anymore, is the Western Regional Conference, which
Okay.
was a collective of all the UCs that came together specifically around various culture and social issues. And attending the Western Regional Conference was the first time that I ever got to be around a cohort of queer people. And
Wow.
really dive in and hear other people's stories and really kind of absorb with what other people will go through and find some kind of simpatico with other people. And it was so liberating and it was so empowering. And Toy Thibodeau was one of the original board members of
Okay.
TruEvolution.
Nice.
Toy has been a major advisor and supporter to the organization over many years. And almost 50% of my staff are UCR graduates who were referrals from the LGBT Resource Center. And so ever since I saw the magic and the power of the cultural and gender and ethnic programming offices that are on UCR's campus, all of those programming offices have always held a very strong place in my heart, and I've always considered to be very strong partners of TruEvolution. So I think they can be amazing resources for those in need.
And I can't stress this enough, students. That should be one of your first stops when you get to campus. Obviously, we're in COVID, but they have websites, and they're still operating. They're still servicing students in the various communities of students that exist on UCR. And if you don't take nothing else away from this interview, from my story, from Gabriel's story, understand that these resources exist to help you. And there's people in these resources that can help you get to where you want to go. And as you mentioned earlier when we were talking about mentorship, who you know is so valuable. Who you know is so important and can actually help set you on that trajectory. So make sure that you're utilizing these resources. So we're coming up on the end of our interview. There's one more thing I would just like you to touch on before I ask you our last question. And then that's the work that you were able to do in the Obama administration. Toy put me on, told me that you was working with the president and you had very instrumental roles in leadership positions. So kind of share with our audience what that experience was like and what you were able to accomplish and what you were proud of from working in that institution.
Yeah. Well, in 2015, I had been invited to become a member of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV and AIDS. And it is an appointment made by the Secretary of Health, and I was first appointed under Secretary Burwell, Sylvia Burwell, and in the Obama administration. And that is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life, to be able to say that in some small way I helped to move forward the agenda of one of the first, the first, hopefully not the last, but the first Black president in the history of the United States, and that's an honor.
Yes, sir.
I will say that there is something magical that happened. And I remember the first day of the council meeting. It's a group of 25 people. I was one of 25, and we sat in a half circle. It's like a square, half square.
Sure.
And everyone went around the room and introduced themselves, and these were the executive provosts from Harvard and the deans of MIT and the head of the GW school of this and the deputy director of the Center for Disease Control.
So shot callers, pretty much, right?
I mean, the people who are the people.
Right.
In not only infectious diseases, not only in public health, but in public policy, shot callers. And I'm just a little black queer boy from UCR.
Right.
And I remember hearing them give feedback and commentary on how they think that we should be rolling out programs and services to benefit a population that I belong to. Black people, brown people, queer people, poor people. And some of the things that they said, I think, didn't have all the context and nuances that really, needs to be said when you talk about working with communities. And I found for the first time that sharing my story and combining my expertise and my training and my background and my culture and my identity and my lived experience, when all of those can become into one place and you can articulate it clearly.
Yes.
It is transformational. It is absolutely transformational. And our individual voices on our specific lived experiences, taken in a larger context for the population, is something that is so needed in today. And when we think about COVID-19 and we think about the disparities that are happening in the African American community, in poor community, in indigenous communities, in the Asian Pacific Islander communities, these are specific, unique experiences that are happening within cultural communities. And there is nuances why these things happen. And I really think that we need to start realizing when we think about power, when we think about power, that you have so much more power than what you think you do. And the system is designed to make you believe that you do not. And so I just want to close on your point, and I want to drive it home even more. Relationships. If you don't remember anything that you came out of undergrad with, all right, but you better have came out with 5 relationships, both mentors, mentees, and peers. You need all 3. So while you're in here at UCR, find at least 5 to 6 mentors that you identify in year 1, and you keep all the way to year 4 and beyond. Identify 5 peers who will be around you. They are your tribe, and they are your village, and you need to build that around you. And you need to sow seeds into the next generation. So find 5 mentees that you can take on, that you can groom, and realizing that mentorship is one of reciprocity. You learn from your mentees just as much as the mentors teach. So I think it's very important that whatever the students do while they're at UCR, that if you don't do anything else, that you make building healthy, meaningful, and deep relationships your primary focus in this college experience.
And I could follow up for hours about how instrumental that is, but one point that I wanted to kind of comment on is just how you said, here I am in this space of people who are at the top of the world in their fields, whether it's public health, whether it's some aspect of education, higher education, whatever. These are the shot callers.
The best. No, these were the best. Yeah,
and yet you were still able to bring in your lived experience, backed with your training and the understanding you gained throughout your college experience, and you were able to tell these experts, this is what it is. And it's sick in this capitalist culture that everything is a commodity. But I want students to understand that your lived experience is so valuable. There are so many people, corporations, institutions that want your lived experience. They want your lived experience. And if you can master and control your lived experience and reinforce it with proper education, proper training, mentorship, there's no limit on what you can do and where you can take your life, because you'll be in full control of it. You will no longer be a victim of your circumstance. You'll be now creating these opportunities for future generations and not only for yourself. So, Gabriel, thank you.
Yes.
And I just, I do want to end on a little bit of Black optimism, right? And so if you could, just for closing, what could you tell our future generation of UCR scholars, in particular our Black and our Black queer brothers and sisters as well.
Yeah.
What is your most optimistic vision of the future for them? And don't be afraid to sprinkle a little bit of radical in there, if you will, too.
Yeah. Oh, my family. Family, I know this is scary times right now.
Yes.
And it is. But let me tell you, these times of chaos, this is where opportunities happen. This is where, when the system's glue comes undone,
yes,
this is where you can move bricks and move
right.
blocks and move things around. So my hope for you all is that you will recognize the opportunity. Recognize the opportunity. Recognize what resources are at your disposal. Recognize what opportunities are available for you to maneuver and pivot.
Right.
Dig deeper into entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Dig deeper into educating yourselves beyond formal education, but also other kinds of certifications and crafts and trades and skills. These kinds of things are so valuable. And the kind of paralysis that is happening in the world right now, it's really a golden moment that is not going to come around again, at least not for many more years, where the system is so nimble that you can begin to shape your own destiny. And I really do hope that we take the entire system and we flip it all over on its head.
Just flip the entire table.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we do that by investing in maneuvering through, around, within, and building new systems. So do not be afraid to do it. This is the moment to do it, is right now.
Absolutely. Chaos just breeds opportunity. And you can do so many things right now, and it's very, very, very easy to get jaded. It's very easy to get discouraged. It's very easy to be angry. But you have to funnel that, right? You have to funnel that through a sense of optimism, because the fact is we're standing on our ancestors' shoulders, right? The reason why you and I are able to have this conversation is because the people before us had enough forethought to say, I want this to exist for not myself maybe right now, but the people coming up behind me. So thank you so much, Gabriel, for sharing that. We really, really appreciate your time and you making the time out to be here on the Blue, Gold, and Black podcast. We were super happy to amplify your voice today. So thank you so much. I look forward to having you back on in the future, hopefully, in between your busy schedule. We know you got a lot of popping things going on, but thank you so much for giving back, and we'll catch you guys later. Thank you for joining us on Blue, Gold, and Black. This program is produced by the Community Engagement and Outreach Unit of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of California, Riverside. Learn more about attending UCR by visiting admissions.ucr.edu, and be sure to check out the description for other useful links and resources. Help support this podcast by liking, subscribing, and sharing. And be sure to check out our podcast videos on YouTube. Catch you guys later.